Gone global. Leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald. Well, I'm here in Washington, D.C. on what has proved to be a pretty big day, because I'd planned tonight of the 200 days, whether Trump was succeeding or failing, but I think events have run beyond it. North Korea, as you all know, have increasingly been doing missile tests and making a series of threats. Indeed, yesterday they threatened to carry out a missile strike on the US Pacific territory of Guam, which is a base for the US's strategic bomber force. In response to all of this, the president said that he would unleash fire and fury like the world has never seen if North Korea continues with its nuclear threats. So we are in a very, very serious situation, and I was very lucky, very privileged earlier on today to be able to speak to President Trump's senior policy advisor and speechwriter, Stephen Miller. With threats to North Korea, countless sackings, resignations in the administration, public spats with the media, I asked Stephen, what's the atmosphere like in the West Wing?
Well, you're well positioned, Nigel, with your own experience to understand how the media hysteria and the corporate commentary oftentimes bears little resemblance to the reality. You could say that there's a bit of an attempt to create a alternate version of reality by the media to distract from the truth about what we're doing. 2016 was a remarkable year, a revolutionary year for working people, for everyday, ordinary people all across this country and many other parts of the world. And for the last 200 days, we've been trying to, as the president said, drain the swamp. What have we done? For every one new regulation, 16 we've said goodbye. At the Department of Justice, we've cleared away a lot of the old policies and started getting tough on prosecutions, tough on drugs, tough on crime, make our communities safer. Border crossings illegally on the southern border are down by record amounts. You've seen a complete change in our approach to trade and manufacturing policy to tell other countries that we're not going to accept cheating and illicit practices, and begun a renegotiation of our trade agreements like NAFTA and take a hard look at how we deal with trade unfairness from China. So these are major changes to a broken system that's been broken for a very, very long time. And so I expect the corporate media to have negative things to say about it.
And interestingly, it's in foreign policy in many ways where Donald Trump has surprised people, because when he was elected president, they said, oh, America's pulling up the drawbridge, it's not going to engage with the outside world. But clearly, with North Korea, what we've got is Mr. Trump saying so far and no further, and doing his best to get the Chinese and the Russians and others to effectively put some threats to North Korea. But tell me, just what kind of a threat does North Korea pose to America and the free world?
Well, look, we all understand, as President Trump has articulated, the depth of the threat and menace that is posed by nuclear proliferation. And that's why the president is re-examining a failed strategy. The president inherited years of a failed strategy on North Korea, and we're living through the results now. And so, by definition, you have to change your strategic approach, your rhetoric, your entire thought process from the failed approaches of the past. And across the board, we've inherited a failed approach to a lot of foreign policy, foreign wars, and just our approach to engagement with the world has to be completely rethought. And that's what this president campaigned on, and that's what he's doing.
And are the Chinese going to step up to the plate and help in stopping North Korea from expanding their nuclear capability?
Well, I think one of the most important things that you've seen is the president being so clear, so publicly about China's responsibilities in this regard. And that in and of itself is a major change in America's approach to dealing with the issue. I don't want to forecast what the results of that may or may not be, but the frankness of the president's comments, the straightforwardness of his comments broadcast publicly about his expectations in that area, again, represent a new approach to how we're handling the issue, and we'll see what the results of that are. But I think what we can all agree on is the way that this and many other issues have been approached in the past haven't worked. In the case of the United States, what we've ended up with in a period of many decades is an approach to foreign policy in which we've seen increasing hostility and destabilization in many parts of the world, while at the same time a loss of our own economic production here in the United States. So for many folks in America, they've been wondering if how much longer we can sustain a lot of the approaches we've had in the past.
And tell me, Stephen, your job as policy advisor, and I know that immigration is one of your big issues, and last week you rather famously clashed with a CNN reporter, but which was very entertaining for all of us. But I mean, ever since day one,
have you ever been known, Nigel, to clash with any reporters or anyone else on the big issues of the day?
I have clashed with virtually all of them repeatedly over the years, and it's entertaining to watch somebody else doing it. But, Stephen, you know, right from day one, you tried to put a travel ban in place. The judges attempted to stop you. You tried to get legislation pushed through Congress, and it's your own Republican Party, in the case of Obamacare, that voted you down. And what I want to know is, can this president be reconciled with his own political party?
Well, I think there's no doubt that the president campaigned on a transformative restoration of the classic idea of America and the nation state. And that is a major change from what Washington's been doing for a long time. I've outlined some of the amazing gains we've made already, but you're correct. The system, if you look at the judiciary and other issues, is certainly primed to try to prevent that kind of change, although I will note that we had a favorable ruling from the Supreme Court recently on the refugee restrictions and the travel restrictions. That's very positive. But there is a realignment happening in American politics. It's the same realignment you see happening in many other parts of the world. You have everyday, ordinary working people who say this system hasn't delivered for me the way it was supposed to, that large-scale, uncontrolled migration has reduced the standard of living, that trade deals have benefited a small group of people living in a few big cities, but hasn't benefited the working people all over the rest of the country. You've seen an approach to public safety that has made cities unsafe and left people trapped in poverty, and a welfare state that is broken that traps people in dependency. These aren't right or left issues or Democrat-Republican issues. They're American issues. They're issues that resonate with people all over the country.
These are issues, of course, that Trump voters picked up on, and that's why he became the president. But my question to you is, why is it you've got members of the Senate and members of Congress who were there as Republicans who simply don't seem to share these values?
My view, to put things in a simple frame, is this. There's two kinds of issues in this world. Issues that can only succeed in the dark of night, and issues that can only succeed in the bright light of day. The Trump agenda, the American agenda, is the latter. The more sunlight that bakes into these issues, the better their prospects become by the hour, by the day. Sunlight is our absolute best friend. The more we are talking publicly about immigration and border control, about public safety, about welfare reform, about historic tax cuts, the more we're talking publicly about these issues, the more the momentum for them is unstoppable and ultimately inevitable. And in that sense, I'm an eternal optimist. But more importantly, the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of this country, is deeply optimistic about these issues and the future of America.
Okay, and tell me something. The President, your Commander-in-Chief, he's a 71-year-old man. He's worth many, many billions of dollars. He clearly has an incredibly close relationship with his family, his children. He loves playing golf. He's rather good at it by all accounts, and he owns golf courses all over the world. And yet here he is, as president, taking a daily battering, a battering from the media, from the Democrats, and even from people like John McCain on his own side. How is Donald Trump bearing up 200 days into this job?
Well, first of all, the president is a fighter. If you want to sum up the president in one word, that would certainly be a good word to use. And he, right now, is relishing the opportunity to go to battle on behalf of what he termed the forgotten men and women of the country. It's what he thinks about when he wakes up in the morning and when he goes to bed at night, and that's his focus, and he's relishing that battle. He's taking enormous pride in the gains that we've made, and he's loving having a chance to spend time with the people whose lives are improved by these policies, whether it's time spent with the veterans, whether it's time spent with the police officers, time spent with the factory workers. This is something that brings him profound joy, to spend time with the everyday, ordinary people who are benefiting from the new policies we're putting into place. And so he's loving his job, and he's loving the chance to do what he campaigned on.
Now, General Kelly has, I'm told, taken charge of the West Wing, and there's going to be a new sense of discipline. Does this mean that we'll expect to see Donald Trump tweeting rather less than he has been in the last couple of months?
Well, I think it's important to understand that social media, sort of ties back to your first question, is a way to bypass the legacy media, the establishment media. You know, the media has historically been called here in America the mainstream media, but I've always felt that's the wrong term, because the media we're talking about is the extreme media, right? The media that supports open borders, the media that supports uncontrolled welfare, the media that supports policies that enable the distribution of drugs and the spread of crime, all those sorts of things. So it's a way to bypass the extremist voices in the media and talk straight to the people. And I think that's a very powerful tool that we have. And
oh, no, it is. It is. And he does it remarkably well. He does it remarkably well. Some would say it's not conventional. And lastly, you know, a lot of people seeing the rhetoric on North Korea, perhaps getting a little bit worried. Is President Trump going to make the world a safer place?
Not only is he, but he already is. And if you look at what we've accomplished with our trip overseas, say to Saudi Arabia, and the call for cracking down on the financing of extremism and encouraging countries in the Middle East to take greater charge of their own affairs, and you see the engagement of the world community on North Korea, you see the passage of the UN Security Council resolution with the votes of China and Russia on North Korea, we are making the world a safer place. And I'll just note, look at the policies of the last 10, 20 years on foreign policy matters, and that's produced the situation we've inherited. We were voted to change course. That's what this president is doing.
Well, that was President Trump's senior policy advisor and speechwriter, Stephen Miller, who I spoke to earlier on today. And if you're just joining us or you want to hear that again, you can always go to LBC's Facebook page or to the website lbc.co.uk. So Donald Trump has told North Korea it will be met with fire and fury if it escalates its nuclear threat any further. 200 days in, Trump says the secretive state will face a power like the world has never seen. I want to know from you, would you want Trump to attack North Korea? To get involved in this debate, call me on 0345 60 60 973. Text me on 84850. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, live from Washington, D.C., where the time now is 2:15. Well, here, but it's 7:15 in the UK. Well, that was an exclusive interview for the UK with Stephen Miller, senior policy advisor and speechwriter to President Trump on this very big day, I think, in global politics. Trump simply could not have been clearer when he said to the North Koreans, if they escalate their nuclear threat any further, they'll be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. And then, of course, the North Koreans saying that they would launch a strike against the US territory of Guam. So it is very serious stuff. But I want to know from you, would it be right in this situation for Trump to attack North Korea? And my first caller this evening on this subject is Nigel from Chadwell Heath. Good evening, Nigel.
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. Now, as far as this matter is concerned, these bellicose threats from this Kim Jong were nothing new. We've been having them for some years. This is the first time I've heard a specific threat against an American territory, a named piece of American territory.
Yes, absolutely.
If he is foolish enough to act in this way, then of course there will have to be an overwhelming response. I hope it can be dealt with in a non-nuclear fashion, but it must be sufficient to remove him from power. We simply can't allow this man to carry on. Whilst he's there, my experience of life, for what it's worth, and it may not be worth a lot, is this. When people repeatedly threaten things and keep on threatening things, eventually they do it. because otherwise they simply look foolish. I very much hope he isn't that foolish, and I do think, as far as President Trump is concerned, he's not a diplomat by nature. He's a man who speaks his mind. Now, you can think whether that's right or whether that's wrong. I wonder if perhaps a cooler tone might be more effective than threatening an overwhelming response. In other words, hang on, let me finish. In other words, the iron fist and the velvet glove, as opposed simply to the iron fist. It may
Donald is.
Don't know.
Donald is Donald, isn't he? And he does express things in his own way. I'll tell you what's interesting, Nigel, is that when he became president, and I was here in DC for the inauguration, and the global media said America has now withdrawn from the world. It's rather like the Brexit, sort of anti-Brexit argument. It's pulling up the drawbridge. It's withdrawing from international diplomacy. It's becoming isolationist. And actually what you've seen over North Korea is quite the reverse of that. And I do understand your comment that the words he uses, they are incredibly strong words. But Nigel, I want to make this point to you, that Trump is not doing this in isolation. In fact, far from it. What he's trying to do, and OK, I'm putting his side here, folks, but what he's trying to do is to get an international effort to stop this mad Kim, as many of us see him, from escalating the nuclear threat further. And we did get, over the course of this weekend, the UN Security Council voting unanimously to impose strict new sanctions on Pyongyang, and that includes, Nigel, China and Russia. So I don't think he's about to press any buttons soon.
I'm
but he is trying to...
delighted to hear that they're going to impose sanctions. I very much doubt if that's going to have any term whatsoever for this man. When you're dealing with somebody like this, you can't reason or rationalise with them. They simply won't take any notice. What has to happen now has to be impressed upon him, not in terms of economic sanctions, but in terms of a direct military threat, that any action he may take will result in his own obliteration. As far as Trump and isolationism is concerned, I think that term was possibly used in relation to America's economic policy. We have yet to see whether that takes place or not. I'm not against Trump, incidentally. Far from it.
No, OK.
But I think at the moment, remember what Winston said, war is better than war. Every effort must be made. We must not walk blindly into possible nuclear war.
Well, we haven't reached that stage yet, Nigel, but, you're right to be concerned, and many, many people are. My next caller is Robert in Dulwich. Robert, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. Look, I thought maybe quickly explain or help with the listeners to understand that the problem strategically with going into Korea is that the North Koreans can easily kill a lot of civilian casualties, make a lot of civilian casualties in South Korea, because Seoul...
Yes.
And people got to understand, this isn't just like going into Iraq and all the rest of it. Whatever happens, there will be mass civilian casualties, because I think the North Koreans have got something like 100,000 guns, conventional weapons, trained on Seoul, which is a highly, very highly...
That's absolutely right, and they could literally press a button and do it. You're absolutely right.
Right. So the problem is, and that's always been a problem there, actually. Now, we saw Bill Clinton 25 years ago told us he made the world a safer place in terms of Clinton. We've watched the Obama administration as this unfolded, and here we get Donald Trump, who is left holding the hot potato. And, it's very easy for us to sit here in Europe and say, well, you've got to do something now, President, because if you don't, you'll be dealing with a man who it looks like quite soon is going to have a nuclear capability. And any way you cut this, as a trader, you are better off dealing with a guy when he hasn't got the nukes yet than when he has, right?
Is there a parallel? Is there a parallel, in your opinion, between this and what a German chancellor was saying and doing in the 1930s?
I mean, I actually think yes, but I don't think I think Kim Jong-un is actually, I think he's genuinely mental. I mean, of course, Hitler did terrible.
Well, I'm not sure Hitler was too stable, was he?
No, but I think that Hitler, there was a method in his madness. This guy, if he doesn't like you, boom, you just get executed. I mean, maybe he's heading that way, Maybe they start off with some sort of logic and they go completely off the rails. But
you would advise caution, Robert, in this situation, yeah?
No. I think we've got to do something. I think Trump, unfortunately, is the guy. But what's scaring me what's worrying me almost as much? I mean, sitting in Europe, I can say that. What's worrying me more is you've got people who are still attacking Trump, still making jokes about him, and we're on the brink of about to go to task with a nuclear war. I mean, everyone's got to grow up. I expect my politicians and the media.
No, well, we all need to grow up, and actually, this is not a time for much levity. It's a very, very serious day. Robert, you're absolutely right in saying that. On text and tweet I get, North Korea won't stop these threats and will keep on going until they fire a missile onto American soil. So the president has no choice but to defend his country. On Facebook, Debbie says, if you want to stop wars, redistribute the wealth worldwide. Well, Debbie, that's a lovely, idealistic idea, but you know what? It ain't going to happen. Robert says attack is the best form of defence. Martin says he has no right to attack whatsoever. And Roger says, do you risk doing nothing and allowing Kim Jong-un time to develop even more powerful weapons that could one day kill millions of people living in major American cities? Better to act now and take him out for good. Well, Trump has certainly made those threats. I wonder what Rufus in Woolwich makes of Trump and what he said about North Korea.
Hello, Nigel.
Good evening.
Hello, good evening, Nigel. Just to say, I've never agreed with you. I've never agreed with Donald Trump. But there are two key issues in which we must come to agreement. Number one is global warming. And number two is the issue of North Korea. If Donald Trump wants to make himself proud and indeed makes the Americans proud and the rest of the world, he should look after that fat boy called Kim Jong-un in North Korea. If that guy attacks anywhere, or threatens the American peace or the world peace, it should be looked after.
So, Rufus, you think Trump is right to make these threats, yeah?
It is 100% right.
100% right. And isn't it good news, Rufus, that he's not on his own and that the UN Security Council unanimously voted for tougher sanctions, which I think is a move in the right direction. And what Trump, Rufus, has tried to do here, he's actually trying to get the international community together as one. Maybe in some ways, despite people's dislike of him, in some ways, actually, isn't Trump behaving like a statesman in this?
I totally agree with you, and I must say I'm a fan of Obama, but in terms of North Korea, Obama is a pure disgrace. It's a total disgrace to mankind. He should have taken care of this guy. This is one of the countries that George Bush called the axis of evil, and indeed, he is an axis of evil.
Rufus, you've made your points very clearly and very beautifully. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, live from Washington, D.C., where it's 2:30, but in the UK, it's 7:30. I'm here in Washington, D.C. on a day when the war of words between North Korea and President DJ Trump has reached a level that many people I've spoken to in this city this morning really are beginning to fear that perhaps military conflict may not be too far away. We were lucky to get an exclusive UK interview with Trump's senior policy advisor and speechwriter, Stephen Miller, earlier on. We played it in a show. If you want to hear it again or you haven't heard it at all, go to LBC's Facebook page or go to the website lbc.co.uk and get the West Wing's take on what is happening here. On Twitter, I get a war may in the end help those poor citizens in North Korea and bring them out of the hell they live in. That's what Chris says. Well, Chris, that may be true, but I wonder at what cost. I'm asking you folks, would it be right, given this situation, and if Mad Kim, as many of us think of him, continues to escalate the nuclear threat, would it be right in this situation for Trump to attack North Korea? I'm going to ask Oliver in Ware, Hertfordshire, that very question.
Hello, Nigel.
Good evening.
How are you?
I'm all right, but I'm all right. But it's I have to say I've met a lot of people today, taxi drivers, people serving lunch, who are genuinely worried about this situation.
And I understand, and actually this is an issue of global politics that's, pervading our daily life. I have two very quick points to make. Firstly, my belief is that if the Americans dropped a non-nuclear bomb on Pyongyang, that would solve the problem, because, as I'm sure you're aware and Mr. Trump is aware, Pyongyang is where the political body of North Korea lies. And I believe if you destroy that, you would end the problem, because not all of the people in North Korea, I believe, actually believe in the Kim Jong-un and the Un regime, and probably haven't done for a long time.
But Oliver, it would take more than one bomb, wouldn't it?
Oh, no, I understand that. But if we look at what the Americans dropped in Iraq a few months ago, the mother of all bombs. Now,
the Moab,
yeah, the Moab, yeah, thank you. If you drop that in Pyongyang, and obviously you would take out the Un dynasty and you would take out the military advisors, I think that would solve the problem, because I'm sure that you can't surely say that everyone in North Korea believes the propaganda that is being peddled out on a day-to-day basis, and also as well with what the South Korean people have been doing over the last few years, sending balloons with basically information about how the North Korean regime is, basically indoctrinating them with false beliefs. So that's one point. But another point that I'd like to quickly make, because I know we're probably running out of time, is that during the Cold War there's a theory called mutually assured destruction, and I believe that probably will still, play out now in this war of words between Mr. Trump and Kim Jong-un. The policy advisors in Pyongyang and also in America all know that if North Korea did drop a nuclear bomb in Guam, where they're talking about potentially doing so, that the Americans would strike back with double the ferocity. Now, I'm sure that Kim Jong-un must realise if he does that, he'll risk destroying the dynasty and the country that he and his predecessors wanted to build up. So I really think that the theory of mutually assured destruction will continue to restrict both sides from actually engaging.
Well, Oliver, mutually assured destruction works, provided you're dealing with a rational actor. I wonder, is Kim a rational actor?
Well, some of your previous callers said that he's a madman, and I tend to agree with them wholeheartedly. But obviously he will have advisors, like all political individuals and political leaders do in this world. And they'll probably be telling him that if he drops a nuclear bomb, whether it be on Guam or whether they, are able to develop a nuclear warhead that can fit into an intercontinental ballistic missile, if they do that, they know that they will get a nuclear strike with double the ferocity. So really, my belief is that whilst this is a serious situation, this is currently just a war of words.
OK, Oliver, and if you were Donald Trump, you would be tempted to drop conventional weapons on the regime in their capital, yeah?
Of course, yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Oliver, with a strong view there. Matt in Chelmsford. Good evening, Matt.
Hi, Nigel.
So what should Trump... Come on, you're Donald Trump, Matt, for the next minute and a half. What would you do?
Well, I wouldn't attack conventionally. I wouldn't attack with any sort of nuclear forces. I just wanted to buttress a few points been made. You say he's not a rational actor, that's fine, but he's actually following quite a rational, game theoretic and neo-realist sort of perspective and outlook on international relations. It's the only effective method and strategy he has to retain his regime. He looks around the world and sees Libya, they get rid of their weapons, take out Gaddafi. Saddam Hussein, even when he gave up most of his weapons in the 1990s, they take him out. It's the only rational... Obviously, I don't support it at all, but it's the only rational strategy that he has to maintain it. And it's gone too far now. And unfortunately, the sad fact is that the negatives far outweigh the positives if you're going to try and take him out. You can't take him out conventionally whatsoever because they have strategically placed bombs everywhere. It is a completely indoctrinated society. If you take out the leadership, how can you be sure there won't be someone there with their finger on the bomb and launch the weapons? You don't know what the structure is of the leadership, and I just think it's a ridiculous way to go about. Unfortunately, I think you have to live with the fact that it's occurred, and it's a failure of policy over decades, and there's nothing you can really do about it, materially do about it, I don't think.
Well, Matt, Japan, Hirohito, in 1945, had a deified status, didn't he? And
Pardon?
we believe the entire Japanese nation was totally indoctrinated into believing that he was God. Now, they were two horrendous nuclear bombs, but that mindset pretty quickly changed in Japan, didn't it?
Well, there's dispute over whether it was the bombs that changed their mind, or was it the fact that the Soviets were going to go and invade, and that when the Soviets said they were going to actually invade Japan, they realised they didn't have a party to parlay with the US. So that's disputed over whether the bomb actually was the final blow, because they were quite willing to take the firebombing and all that sort of stuff. But I get your point about, if you take
I don't believe
people below. Go on.
I don't believe, Matt. I do not believe that you can indoctrinate a people so totally that they will, until the end of their dying days, believe that this man is the great, divine, dear leader, whatever they now call him. And I think there are ways that public opinion can change. But, Matt, I understand your caution. Debbie says to me on Facebook, no, don't attack North Korea. Remove the one single nutter doing this. We know drones work, don't we? Well, maybe we do, Debbie. I don't know. Brian says, what about all the civilians? They suffer as usual. Preemptive strikes, are they morally right? Look what's happened in the Middle East in recent years following these military strikes. Well, Brian, I do understand what you're saying, because what we did in Iraq and what we did in Libya was to go deliberately and willfully for regime change, and I think, unarguably, in the case of Libya, to make things far worse than they'd been before. The difference is that in the case of Iraq and the dodgy dossier, and I hope you're listening, Alistair Campbell, I really do, it was cooked up, wasn't it? We were told within 45 minutes they could obliterate us. Actually, that wasn't true. What you have got with this guy in North Korea, what you've got with Kim, is him launching missile after missile, and now, just today, directly threatening a strike on US territory. So this situation is far more serious than anything we were confronted by Iraq or by Libya. We're not quite at the level of the Cuban Missile Crisis, but hey, I think it's serious. Jacob in Brighton, what's your view?
Hello, Nigel. Good to speak to you.
Good evening.
I believe that North Korea... this is what the former Australian ambassador to South Korea said, and I agree with him very much, that he said that North Korea is like a porcupine, and the more that you prod them and provoke them, saying fire and brimstone is going to rain down on Pyongyang, the more they're going to stick up their quills. And that's what we're seeing recently with these Trump quotes.
Well, Trump does express things in his own way, Jacob, and we've seen that through all 200 days of his presidency. But he's not without international support here, is he?
Well, no, but I don't believe that you can do anything militarily to take out the Kims. You will never see, what you saw in Iraq, you'll never see the people tearing down statues of the dear leaders like you saw with Saddam Hussein, because 70 years...
So what if, Jacob,
yeah.
what if you and I watch this over the course of the next 2-3 years, and we see him develop bigger and better and longer-range missiles with nuclear capability? Do we just stand back and allow a guy that could kill millions of people just to get on with it? Or does there come a moment at which it's right to intervene?
Well, I don't think you can intervene with a state that has nuclear weapons. I mean, you can't imagine intervening in Mao's China in the 70s because they had nuclear weapons.
But the point about North Korea is they haven't yet fully developed their capability. Is it not an argument that maybe what Trump wants to get the international community to do is to nip this in the bud?
Well, I think it's a bit late for that. I mean, the people there will never support any outside regime change. 70 years of indoctrination and fear of the secret police.
I don't know.
They'll never support it, I don't think.
The wall came down and didn't take many months for the East Germans all to want to start making money and buy chewing gum and all the rest of it. Jacob, you have taken the most negative view we've heard so far. Jacob thinking it's all too late. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, live from Washington, D.C., where now it's 2:45 here and 7:45 back at home. I'm in Washington, D.C. on the day that tensions between Trump and North Korea escalated to a truly extraordinary level. And to remind you, the president said that if Kim Jong-un continued with his nuclear escalation, he would unleash upon him fire and fury like the world has never seen. And they, in response, said that they would launch an attack on the US territory of Guam. So it is serious. And I'm asking you, would it be right in these circumstances for Trump to launch an attack on North Korea? Now, there are an awful lot of different views and strong views on this. Who are we dealing with here in terms of this leader? Well, some reports say he's 35, some say he's 34, others say perhaps he's as young as 33. And I have to say that Mobeen tweets in and says, if I were the US president, I would shut my mouth. Mad Kim isn't going to be around forever. We don't need another war to end this. Well, Mobeen, if he's only 34 or 35, he could be around for one hell of a long time. And he is developing capability all the while. Evening, Nigel. If I were Trump, I would launch a covert mission using special forces to take out Mad Kim, just like America did with bin Laden. That's what Dell thinks ought to be done. I don't know. What do you think should be done? What does Jamie in Newcastle think should be done? Good evening.
Hello, Nigel. How are you doing?
Hi. I'm all right. But I am worried. I am worried. I mean, it is, as I say, it's not as serious as the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it is serious, Jamie, isn't it?
No, it is, and I think the thing we really have to be asking ourselves is, why is Trump the only leader that we've heard something from at the minute? Is it just because he's this nutter, as everybody likes to make out? I'm young and I'm a Tory, but I can't help but be somewhat annoyed that we haven't heard much from our own government on Miss May yet.
I am very pleased you've raised that point. She's on holiday. So presumably that matters more than the North Korean crisis. No, we've heard very little out of the British government, and indeed the governments across Europe have basically said nothing about this whatsoever. Many of them, of course, these days not taking defence desperately seriously. But Jamie, the point that I've been trying to make is that Trump is calling on the Russians and the Chinese and others to join him in this international crusade against nuclear escalation. Isn't he right at least to be doing that?
He's definitely right to at least raise the point that something needs to be done about it. But there's two things that I know for some certainty. Korea is a hornet's nest. It's unapologetically paranoid, and we don't want to shake up that hornet's nest too much because we don't want the entirety of the West being destroyed by this madman that we know virtually nothing about. But also, that part of the world only really responds to violence. So we're kind of in where we have a scenario where we're backed up against a wall somewhat. Something needs to be done, but all we can do is going to make things worse in one way or the other.
Well, Jamie, you describe it as a hornet's nest that we don't want to stir up. But equally, what we don't want to allow is for his hornets to be able to reach us. At the moment, they can't reach us. They certainly can reach South Korea and some neighbouring countries. But the point is to make sure those hornets can't go any further. Isn't that what this is really all about?
Yes, but we should maybe also be starting, and maybe it's me being a bit youthful and exuberant, but maybe we need to bring some sort of civil defence program like we had back in the 80s when we're knowing that nations like North Korea are beginning to be a bit more saber rattling, shall we say?
Well, Jamie, we can do whatever you want on civil defence and contingencies for disaster. I think Trump's argument is we actually need to act at some point to stop us ever needing to do that. Jamie, I thank you very much for your call and your point of view, and indeed your honest, frank nervousness. You're not alone. A lot of people out there are feeling like this. On text I get, we tried it Clinton's way and Obama's way. Right now, North Korea needs containing, and fluffy language won't do it. I back Trump's firm stance, says Michael. Well, one thing you could never say about Trump's language is that it was fluffy. It certainly isn't, is it, Sarah, in Milton Keynes? Good evening.
Hi, and how's DC? I love that place. I've been there. It's very nice.
Yeah, I like DC, and I have to tell you that normally in August, you know, being built on a swamp as it is, it's muggy and it's horrible. Today is a beautiful day in DC, but Sarah, people here are talking about North Korea a lot more, I sense, than people back at home are talking about North Korea. And, you know, there is a genuine desire, particularly after all the years of Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. There is, a genuine desire not to get wrapped up in another war. But, Sarah, a lot of people feeling that unless we act, unless we do something, that maybe there are parallels with the rise of Mr. Hitler in the 1930s, who perhaps we should have stopped earlier.
I don't think he should do anything at the moment. I like Trump. I'm disappointed he's not using his business networking sense that he would. And I believe his advisors have probably, because he is obviously new to this, isn't he? And I think he's probably listened to his advisors. Far too strong a language for me. And what do they say about keeping your friends close and your enemies closer? I'm surprised he hasn't offered. I mean, what's worse, deploying all sorts of military or just asking the guy over for a state visit? I mean, what could be possibly worse? I mean, he's only going to say no. Has anybody ever tried that? I mean, has he ever left the country, that guy?
All right. So what you're saying is that often you can catch more flies with sugar than you can with vinegar, and that what Trump should do is to invite the North Korean leader on a state visit to Washington, yeah?
Well, it can't. It's a lot better than global nuclear war.
No, look, I tell you what, Sarah, it's actually a very, very good and very interesting suggestion. I'll make sure that message gets through to the White House, I promise you. Thank you very much indeed. And my last caller of the evening is Santi, who's calling in from Stratford-upon-Avon. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Good talking to you. Before I say what I'm going to say, let me say I am a Trump supporter, and I have very rarely disagreed. I agree with most of the things he's done. Now, on this one, I think what is needed is not a good statesman. It needs a great statesmanship. I really think, Kim, whatever people say, he's not a madman. He's actually, he's got an amazing influence in his country. He's not mad, but he's dangerous. What we need to do is really make him feel respected. And I think the best way to do that is to talk to the guy. And the people of Korea, I'm sure the people of North Korea do not want a war. They're probably suffering with a lot of poverty, economic problems. What they want is to have some pride. So let's sit down, talk to him, invite him, or do whatever, like the lady said earlier, and give him some pride and eat some humble pie as well. America does not have to act great. What has happened so far acting that way? All we've got is more and more disasters. Let's change it a bit. America is so great that it can afford to eat humble pie and act a little bit in a different way,
Okay. No, Santi, listen, thank you for that point of view. And the last 2 points of view there, saying, look, before we start pressing buttons or doing anything, let's have an attempt at being reasonable, and maybe if we do that, we'll show the North Korean people, despite the propaganda that they get, that we are actually reasonable people. Well, you've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here from Washington, D.C. today. I want to remind you that earlier on we had an exclusive UK interview with Trump's senior policy advisor and speechwriter, Stephen Miller, who talked to us about the real reasons why Trump is threatening North Korea. And you can listen to it by going to LBC's Facebook page or going to the website lbc.co.uk. I am back tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock from London. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Thank you very much, Nigel, and we're going to continue.